You're listening to Rookie Pirate Radio, the official anime and manga podcast for InBetweenDrafts.com. I'm Travis Hymas, and we don't have John this week because we're doing a little bit of a special little presentation here. We have a wonderful writer who has joined us to talk about her new book, The Essential Manga Guide. We have Briana Lawrence here speaking with us today.
Hello.
Thanks for being here, Briana. We'll talk a little bit more about your background and everything here, but I'm just going to take care of some admin real quick. Of course, as always, for fans of the podcast, we usually talk a lot about One Piece chapters. We're off this week, so we won't be doing that. But you can, of course, join our Discord, which is linked in the show notes, and talk not only about One Piece, but also talk about the manga guide, which we just posted a review for in the Discord. You can check that out. We also cover everything else that In Between Drafts covers: movies, TVs, video games, the works. I said TVs. I don't know why people are going to roast me for that later, but we're going to roll with it. Lots of discussion, a lot of fun times happening. And if you're not too sure about the social aspect of Discord, you don't want the live conversation, but you definitely want to correct me for saying TVs a minute ago, you can just send an email to rookiepirateradio@gmail.com. And John will yell at me if I don't say it again. That's rookiepirateradio@gmail.com. Briana, I'm going to talk a little bit about your book, give everybody an intro here, and then we're just going to dive in. So
Awesome.
The Essential Manga Guide, with 50 essays on unforgettable series and groundbreaking single-volume stories, written by Crunchyroll Senior Features Editor Briana Lawrence, The Essential Manga Guide provides a comprehensive, behind-the-scenes look into the history and growing legacy of manga. As a queer black woman and manga superfan, Lawrence also explores and celebrates the wealth of diverse narratives across manga genres, profiling many key series that feature queer characters and storylines, racial inclusivity, topics of gender and sexual identity, body positivity, and more. Both casual fans and serious otaku alike are sure to love this entertaining and personal look at the impact of these outstanding manga titles and their offers, discover great recommendations of what to read next, and realize that there really is a manga series out there for everyone. And Briana, having read the book, I have to agree.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's amazing.
Yeah, I was taken aback by that it was not as clinical as I'd kind of thought going in. Usually these kind of center around kind of doing almost like advertising for these series.
Yeah.
So to get something where there was just more nuance is really, really, really cool. I really appreciated that. But before we talk too much further on that, tell the listeners about yourself and kind of what your background is as a fan and as a writer.
Yeah, so I'm Briana, as you said. I've been writing since childhood. I only know that because my mom kept everything I ever wrote. She will sell it all on eBay once I get famous, so look out for that. She can figure out how to use eBay. She'll have to call me to get the info on how to do it. But I've always wanted to be a writer ever since I was a kid. I didn't really know that expanded into pop culture writing. That just sort of happened accidentally along the way back when, what was the magazine? Protoculture Addicts. I think it was a magazine that like Anime News Network had back in the early 2000s or something like that. And I wrote some stuff for that. And from there, I've been writing for like different websites. I would write freelance for different places, things like that. At one point, I wrote freelance for a little bit for Funimation, like years ago. And I kind of still kept that connection, which got me to Crunchyroll. I've been there for 2 years come August. And I am their senior features editor. But again, I never knew that like pop culture writing was a job you could have when I was little, because this was back in like the 80s and 90s. So there was like no scope like that in my head. I discovered anime by complete and total accident. There was a kid in school who just came to school one day and he was like, there's a cartoon on TV, but it wasn't really a cartoon. And none of us knew what that meant. We were like, what are you talking about? But I just flipped through channels one day and Vampire Hunter D was on TV. And from there, it just like blew my mind. I had never seen anything like that before. I couldn't really explain it, but I fell in love with it. And this was before Toonami was a thing, before we had like Crunchyroll or anything like that. There was no dedicated network. It was just on. And this was before I even knew what manga was. And I told this story recently But I got into manga because my dad brought home Dragon Ball Z comic books. Like, they weren't the actual books we're used to seeing. They were actually like trade paperback floppy comics because they were printed like that. And I was like, oh, cool. Someone did a comic about the thing I like. I didn't know that it was like this thing that had been going on in Japan for like already like a decade. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Somebody did a comic book for Goku. And then later it was like, this is an entire industry. We weren't really talking about it much. It wasn't really in bookstores yet. And you were lucky if you found it in a comic book shop. And from there, the love just like exploded when I like discovered that manga was a thing and anime was growing more and more, like by the year, like by the week, it felt like, and more people were getting into it. And I always felt like anime had something that I related to with like the stories and the characters, which is why when I wrote the book, I was like, I want to talk about the personal stuff I would feel when I was reading manga or watching anime. And it would come from like the most random places I never expected. Like, I didn't expect to feel like an emotional bond to like Orihime from Bleach, but I had lost my older brother. She had lost her older brother. And I was like, I feel a connection from Bleach. Like, I didn't know how to like explain it. And it's like, but I do. And that's what manga makes me feel. And I feel like that's why a lot of us like manga and anime. And a lot of people don't seem to get that that's why we love it so much. But it's like we all feel something, whether it's the story or the characters or what we're watching or reading. There's always something that a lot of us are like, I know what this feels like. I feel seen right now. So yeah, that's kind of like my whole background and writing about it, from like freelance essays to an entire book, which again, I never expected to write an entire book about manga, but that's kind of like a cool little thing I got to do. And it's sort of hitting like the childhood dream of like taking the thing I love and putting it out into the world for other people to like be able to read.
That's so great. And speaking of being seen, I feel very seen both by your story here and how you recount some of that in the book as well. So I fell into that same kind of pattern of, oh, they made comics based on. For me, it was Yu-Gi-Oh! Because when Shonen Jump, and you even call this out specifically in the book, so it took me right back to that moment. Well, when Viz started publishing Shonen Jump, they would put Yu-Gi-Oh! Promos directly into the magazine, and that was the on ramp for me, was trying to get those variant. They were just variants at the time, promo cards, and so I would have to check the magazine section at the grocery store. Those don't exist anymore, but
I know.
It's like, so wild.
This was back when they were just trying whatever they could to get it to take off. And because I remember walking into stores and seeing like anime magazines and just feeling like, I used to
Otaku USA.
Yeah, Otaku USA. And I used to, when I went to college, I would buy the magazines, rip out the pictures and tape them to my wall, because that was the closest I could get to getting like anime images. Like, there was no place that would sell like, I mean, we had Suncoast, but there was no place that would sell like individual pictures of things I wanted. So I would just rip out a picture of Dio Maxwell and tape it to my closet door.
Well, and that would eventually evolve into like online, where people would like share key art and everything as well. And you could just Google search and everybody's wallpaper was just like this really bad resolution Full Metal Alchemist thing. And it's great that doing that stuff, though. Like, it sounds really silly, but we ran a Full Metal Alchemist piece recently on the site. Go check it out if you haven't. And it was about the 2003 anime, which is not available anywhere.
It's not. It's just gone.
It's gone to the wind. All of the promotional stuff is gone as a result of that as well. And so what we ended up discovering was somebody had kept an archive of basically every image in a magazine, every promo, every CD cover, every DVD cover. They had kept assets and had archived all of it just because they were using them as like wallpapers and for their own collection. And they're like, you know what? I'm just going to put this out online so people can reference back to it. And that was a lifesaver for us in a couple of different ways. So that's actually linked in our Discord too, if people want to check that out. I thought that was a great public service.
That's amazing.
So that's not cringe. Like, I cut out those those images. So. Those images might be the last ones on Earth. So like, I feel like a lot of people listening are be like, geez, the people here right now are very, very old. But like, that's how it was at the time.
That's how
here.
it was. And that's the fascination of seeing it grow so much. Because when you're from that era of like, because anime was here, we just weren't really calling it anime. We're like the generation where like our parents would be like, I don't watch anime. And we'd be like, but you watch Speed Racer. That's anime. But we weren't really calling it anime at all. And so going from that generation to 2024, where it's like, oh yeah, you want to watch anime? You watch it alongside Japan. It's like, what? How? This seems like sorcery in my head because I just remember waiting years and years for, I know this is going to sound silly, but like the next episode of Dragon Ball Z, but it's like, because it stopped and it didn't air for years. And finally Cartoon Network came around and they created Toonami and they continued the story. And it's like, we used to have to wait that long, or we used to have to like buy the VHS tapes with 2 episodes and it would be a lot of money. And now it's like, yeah, the price I would buy for a single VHS tape, I could buy an entire series. And I love that we're at that point now, but I never thought we would get to that point because a lot of people are like, yeah, this is going to go away. This is not going to like take off, whatever. It's just like a thing that's happening and it's going to die down eventually. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right. Like, I never thought it would be like a career or anything like that. It's like, yeah, it probably will. Like, Sailor Moon will be over at some point, but now we're celebrating the fact that we're still making Sailor Moon movies, you know? Like, it's
Sailor Moon got put back on Toonami like last week for the first time, like 15 years.
Oh yeah, they're doing that like rewind thing or whatever.
Yeah.
And
with like the original.
I want those old bumpers and those old everything. Like, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's wild to think about because that's not even streaming. That's not even simulcast. That's just people like wanting to go back to that era too, and just getting almost like a fast channel of old anime. It's kind of wild to think about that we've looped all the way back around to. Gee, it actually is kind of nice to just stay up late and find a random anime to watch.
Like 11 p.m. and Inuyasha ending theme that we all remember just play.
Yeah,
the
right.
one with Sashomaru standing with his hair blowing in the wind, and you're like, "Yep, memories."
That was the vibe. That was definitely the vibe.
It was.
Going back to the book now, because that all of this that we're talking about really plays into the intro of the book, where you kind of give a history of not just the format for manga in Japan, but how it came to the States, kind of how weird of an experience it was. You know specifically that it was very hard to sell manga or anime originally to like distributors and everything. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, and the reason why I wanted a section like that was because I realized we're now in a time where we're alongside people who just know what anime is now because it's part of their lives. I have nephews with kids and they're like, yeah, my kid knows what Sailor Moon is. I'm like, oh, like, yeah, it's just on. You just go to Hulu or wherever and it's there. So it's like, I feel like a lot of people don't realize what it took to get it to that point. And it's kind of fascinating because the things that we did, like when we printed it the wrong direction and people are like, you did? Like I was talking to while I was writing the book, I was talking to people about it like in my circle who are younger than me. And they're like, what do you mean we printed it? I'm like, yeah, we printed it in the American direction because we thought people wouldn't read it the Japanese way. And so we printed it that way. And then later they had the brilliant idea of like, what if we just don't do that? Like, what if we don't do that? And it's like a lot of the solutions that happened was like, what if we just leave it as is? But we had that time period where it was like, you know, we printed it the wrong way. My wife still has copies of like Mixed Zine, which was the zine before Tokyo Pop because they became Tokyo Pop. So she's got the old ones where it's got those old Sailor Moon volumes and they are printed the wrong direction. And it's like, yeah, that's what we were doing. And I remember because we still have some of the old books that did that. And at the time I remember reading it and being like, something feels off, but I don't know what it is because I didn't know it was supposed to be printed in a different direction. And so finally, years later, that's why the manga now has the like, you're reading the wrong way at the back because they finally flipped it the right way. And they have that iconic note that's like, you're reading the wrong direction. You have to read it this way. And I remember when I started reading it, the actual correct way, people would be like, how are you doing that? And it's like, you just follow along. Like I just follow along with where the story's going. So it doesn't seem that difficult to me. And I was recently talking to a coworker about this, but he was like, I read so much manga. When I read American comics, I instinctively start reading it like manga. And I'm like, wait, hold on. I had to I had to actually like tell my brain this is not the right direction because now you're reading an American comic. But yeah, once upon a time, back in the day, we printed it the wrong way. We had all sorts of zines trying to like get the stories out there. I remember when I was doing research and finding like the Anime News Network article that talked about how hard it was to even get them to call it anime, which is why we had the like Japanimation like label on it. And I remember having those conversations as a kid, like what do we call it? And nobody knew that it was just anime. We had to add Japan to it, and that's what everybody was doing. And I don't remember when I stopped doing that, but I was so happy because the anime is just so much easier to say in the first place to me. But yeah, that was a time, and a lot of people don't realize that's what we did because now it's like decades later. So now like I go to anime conventions and stuff and I see people who are like teenagers and they're just like, oh yeah, it's anime. It's always been like that. It's like, no, it hasn't. It has not. It has not. Like we actually, because I had a dedication at the beginning that's like to the generation that was told that this was a thank you for proving them wrong. That like this is not just a phase, that this is a thing that we love and should be respected. Mm-hmm. Because I am in that generation where it was like they treated like the second coming of like Satan. Like it was like, this is very bad. Yeah. Like why is this here? Oh. And I'm like, yeah. And also we were bringing over a lot of like very hyper things. And I'm like, guys, there's also like all these other ones too. Like we have like a Cardcaptor Sakura, which actually wasn't brought over the right way either. And a lot of the stuff we were getting was not like the actual intended version of the thing. And even if we didn't know, there's something off. There's something missing. I can tell there's something weird looking at like the like Home for Infinite Losers shirt in Dragon Ball. There's something off here, but I don't know what it is. And then you get older, you're like, oh, that's what it was. Okay, I got it now.
Yeah, it's wild though, because without that generation, without those efforts, who knows if it would have become that way?
I know, right? Yeah.
Like I think about like you bring up like all the weird unintentional ways. I think about Samurai Pizza Cats of all things,
yes,
and how that entire anime just is incorrect, and people love that version of it. There are people who you mentioned Sailor Moon. There are people who adore that original version of Sailor Moon, even though it has, the cousins thing, which is just kind of, you can't really forgive that one. But
and it's funny because stuff with Samurai Pizza Cats, I didn't know that was anime when I was watching it back in the day, because they were like, yeah, it's a cartoon. I was like, yeah, it's a cartoon, and then I'm like, exactly. How much stuff did I watch where it was like it's actually anime? Like Voltron was like, it's actually anime, or like Ronin Warriors is like, that's actually anime. And it's like, but I was watching it and nobody called it anime.
Yeah, my favorite one to catch people on is the Rankin Bass cartoons for Christmas and stuff, like Rudolph and everything. Those are mostly Japanese animation. Like the studios like worked on those and then sent them over. So it's like technically Rudolph is an anime. So it's kind of like, it's always been here, but it's all, up until now, it's been in, kind of compromised forms, but they were strategic forms. The flipping the books and everything. Like we look back on it kind of fondly. I don't think anybody would want to go back to that 100%, of course, but I think that it's all a historical, it's progress. It's getting us to that point where it's not only culturally acceptable, but I think people are curious enough to try reading a book backwards. It's really daunting at first. And so I think even as something, I think you called it in the book, an innovation with you're reading backwards page, but like that introduces people to the Japanese language in a way, in that like, hey, this is how Japanese works. And like, you've learned something before you do anything. And I think that tickles a little bit of the brain, that gives you just a little bit of serotonin for like, oh, I now know something. So
and also, we had to get there. When I was writing the book, my editor was like, you do kind of have to write this as if you're talking to someone who's not as familiar with this as you are. Because everybody in my life basically is super familiar. Like, my wife is a huge anime fan. Like, my friends are huge anime fans. Like, we go to the bookstore once a month. My editor's like, you have to write this as if the person doesn't know. Like, because there's going to be a bunch of people who don't know who might grab this. And so you kind of have to, talk in a way where it's like, this is why it's like this. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. And I had to kind of turn off because I write at Crunchyroll, I'm like the senior features editor, and there I don't have to explain. Like our audience knows, so I don't have to like explain like what shonen is, what shoujo is, and all these other why the book is printed this way. And so she was like, you have to write this as if the person doesn't know. So my brain was like, act like you're writing to your mom. Because my mom is super supportive of everything I do, and she loves everything I do, but she is not into anime or manga. But she used to watch it with me because she's like, that's what you do when your kids into a thing. You sit there and you watch it with them. And so I was like, okay, I have to pretend like I'm talking to my mom right now. So I had to explain, yes, it's printed this way. And I even had this conversation with her while I was writing the book, and she was like, they print it like that. I was like, yeah, they do. And I'm like, you just have to like, yes, this is like, talk to your mom. Like, this is how you do it. This is how you like get this out. And it is kind of fascinating because I ran into this when I went to the bookstore recently, and me and my wife were there, and we saw two parents standing in the manga aisle with their kid, and they're like, why is the book printed like that? I'm like, so this is still happening. People are still picking manga up, and they're like, why is it like this? And my first thought was like, how do you not know? Like, it's 2024, we did all this stuff. Then I realized not everybody's into manga. Like, it's blown up a lot more than I ever thought, but it's still like not like as big as some other forms of entertainment that are out there. Like, people know what comics are, like Marvel and DC and stuff, but manga, there's still plenty of people who are like, what does this mean? Like, why is this? So we just walked over and we're like, it's how they do it in Japan. And they're like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, that's the only reason. And then they started flipping and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it now. Like, I see why my kid's reading the book in this direction. So yeah.
And that's and I'm glad that's more the common reaction is just, oh, now I know, instead of, oh, that's the devil,
Right.
Kind of,
exactly.
Which is
what the
true.
reaction was in the 90s, I feel like, oh God, what is this demonic form of reading? And it's like, it's still reading. It's just reading.
It is. It is. And I remember I didn't mean for this to be like a walk down memory lane for everybody, but it kind of is. Like, I remember like Pokemon, when the Pokemon anime dropped.
Oh my God, me too.
And it was the anime that really pushed this. I know there was backlash against like things like the cards and the games, but it was the anime that I think most, conservative circles, for lack of a better term, zeroed in on, because everybody was watching that thing. Everybody. The movie was gangbusters when that first came out. Like, it was the definitive. Like, I don't even think there's a real like current day comparison. Like, short of it being the thing that everybody's talking about on TikTok for some reason, there's really no comparison for like what Pokemania was. And people were just, nah, it's the devil. It talks about evolution. It doesn't have to do with real evolution, but like, that's not the point. But but it was easily digestible for everybody to pick up as as like a starter anime. I think there's an entire generation where their first anime, and they still probably don't even realize it, is just the Pokemon anime.
Yeah,
but that's really what it is, and it's. I think those things have really led to just this broad acceptance where something like the book that you've written kind of becomes necessary. We're getting to a point now where we're very close to, I think, anime and manga being like the Marvel and DC stuff, where you can see every single one of those movies, never crack open a comic book ever, and be the biggest Spider-Man fan in the world, right? So that feels like where we're going with other adaptations and things as well. So something like this is going to be critical to kind of recenter that to the original material, which I think is very important for these stories. And you've really got a great job here. You're talking about your mom, and I remember you referenced back to a couple of times calling her Goku and the rest of them.
Goku and them, yeah. That was what she would call it, because she for the life of her for a while could not pronounce like Goku. But to this day, she is so proud of herself too, because she's like, I know who Goku is, and I'm like, yay!
right?
It's because while I was writing this, we would have those conversations because she used to watch Sailor Moon with me. And so she's like, I remember Sailor Moon. And I was like, oh, you do? Like, she still remembers, like, from 30 some years ago. Because, you know, my parents were divorced. So I would go see her on the weekends. And so I would get to pick what we watch usually. And if it were anime, even if she wasn't into it, she's like, yeah, we'll sit down and watch it. And even now to this day, I'm like, there's something out there you would love. But she still is like, I don't know. like, because she still remembers Goku and them. And that also kind of helped me write the book. Because I was like, a lot of people assume that anime and manga is like one thing, like one singular series. Like they think all of anime and manga is Dragon Ball or One Piece and things like that. And I'm like, no, that's part of it. This is like a small part of a very big medium of stories and genres. And you could pick a genre and just go. Like, I was telling her, she was shocked because, like, a really good example was she loves basketball. She's a huge sports fanatic. And we grew up in Chicago, so I was in the Bulls era.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so huge basketball fan. And I'm like, there's a manga and anime for that. And she's like, oh, I don't know. I was like, no, like, Kuroko actually legitimately has the rules of basketball in the manga and the anime. Like, they play the correct way. And she's like, what? I'm like, yeah, you sit there and you're like, I am investing in a story about basketball for like chapters and chapters and chapters. But I'm like, but they will break down the rules. They will break down everything. So it's like, and I'm telling her, like, while I'm reading this and watching the anime, because I was doing both, I remember watching games with you, you know, and asking her questions like, what does this mean? What is like the quarters and stuff? And she would explain. I'm like, the manga does that. And I'm like, it's a legitimate sports like story. And she was just like, oh, I didn't know they had stories like that. I'm like, oh yeah, there's a story for everything is in manga. And so we had a whole conversation about sports anime because she loves sports. And she'd be like, I bet there's not one for like this sport. Like there's one for every sport. Trust me. There's one for everything. You could name a sport and I could give you a series. But she was just like, in all the years she has known me, she like didn't realize that, oh, there's more to this than the Dragon Ball and Sailor Moon that you watched as a kid. I'm like, yeah, it's a whole medium with things. Like, she loves horror. So I was like, you would love Chainsaw Man. And she's like, well, I was like, yeah, you love that like grisly, gritty, like horror. She's a horror fanatic. I'm like, you would love this. Trust me. And I showed her like a snippet and she was like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, see, there's stuff I could find you things that you would like. And she was just like, wow, okay. So it is more than Goku and them. I'm like, it is.
Yeah. And that's kind of the purpose of this book too, is to have that conversation with everybody. So we talked a little bit about the angle you took when writing it, but how did you decide on the series to use and like how to structure them? Because you're using like a chronological order, and I think that's brilliant because it kind of like sets this up as not necessarily like you're saying these are the 50 best series ever. What you're saying is these are impactful, and here's why. And you can see how they kind of feed into each other. My favorite part in the entire book was reading your essay on Yu Yu Hakusho. Great take on Yusuke. I think that's great.
I love Yusuke.
But turning the page, and the next one up is Sailor Moon, which is just so perfectly adorable. Yeah. Because like even then, because you put these, for people who haven't read the book, there's these little omakes at the end with like extra tidbits, trivia, and recommendations, which I think are a great way to kind of, beat these are the best one allegations. But it notes that Togashi is married to the writer Sailor Moon, and she helped with the series. And then you turn the page, and there's Sailor Moon as like this follow up, and that's when I realized, oh, this kind of tells a story inadvertently of the medium, which is great. But how did you pick them? Still, like,
oh my gosh, many. There are so many, and like, so when I was approached to write the book, I was like, I can do 50 because at the time, I had been writing for a website called The Mary Sue, so I would write daily essays. So it's like, I write essays, so I could do this. And 50 sounded like a very big number initially. I was like, 50 is a lot. Like 50 can, get the general gist down. So I started writing like, here's my favorite series. And, here's the series that make an impact. here's a series that I feel are important or little ones that people might not know exist. They looked at the list, it was way more than 50. It was so much more. And I was like, oh no, what did I do? And I'm like, how do I like narrow this down? Because there's going to be stuff that I forgot or stuff that, and like the biggest thing that would happen was while I was like writing it, I would be reading more manga. And then I'd be like, oh, I really want to write about like she loves to cook and she loves to eat, or Sign of Affection, or Kaiju number 8, or Windbreaker. And I'm like, but I can't change any more titles. I have the 50. So I told myself little things like only pick one work from each creator. So I picked Yu Yu Hakusho because that was my first work that I read from. So I love Hunter x Hunter, but I was like, Yu Yu Hakusho's first one, do Yu Yu Hakusho. And then, you know, you get to like someone like Clamp, and I'm like, oh God, okay. I love Cardcaptor Sakura. I love X. I love so much of their work. And I was like, but Tokyo Babylon's the one that made you feel the most. So like that first initial like Clamp hit for me came from Tokyo Babylon. So I was like, all right, do Tokyo Babylon. And it was very hard because there's a lot of manga I love. And then I was like, do you put in like the big heavy hitters? And it was like, put in the heavy hitters that you relate to, or the ones that mean something to you. So, or the ones that you remember reading or watching and you were just like, oh, like I felt something there. And I kept telling myself, you're gonna miss stuff, because I always see lists like this that's like, what are the best of the best? And I'm like, I don't want this to be a best of the best book, because that sounds intimidating to me. I want this to be like a book that's like a starting point. So here's some series from different genres. If I like these genres, I can start here and probably branch off and find more things. And I would think about, like, I have a couple of friends who are kind of new to anime and manga, and one of them loves horror. She loves like horror and stuff like that. And the first anime I introduced her to was Attack on Titan, which she has never forgiven me for. She has never forgiven me, but she likes that type of story. And so we started watching more anime. And while I was writing the book, she was like, I want to watch something softer. Like, I know you know that I like the heavy stuff. Do not recommend that to me right now. I need something soft. And I'm like, okay, that's why I should do different genres versus like, hey, I know Jujutsu Kaisen will be right up your alley, because it would be. But I'm like, but you need a Spy Family right now. That's the mood you're in for. So I'm going to recommend Spy Family. And so that's kind of helped narrow it down to 50. And I told myself to stop being so worried about forgetting things. And I told myself to be honest when you go into stuff. Like, I wrote about One Piece. And I was like, you know what? I was not the biggest One Piece person. And part of it was because I'm the youngest in my generation on my mom's side, and I'm kind of a brat. So when my cousin was like, you should read One Piece, I was like, no, just to spite you. I'm not going to get into One Piece. And then I was like, I should start One Piece because I'm writing this book. And then I started, I was like, oh no, he was right. This is great. I was like, no, I don't want to tell him that he was right. But I was like, but I kind of want to go into this book realistically in this mindset of like, some of this stuff I was not into at first. And then I was like, you know what? Like Berserk was one. I was like, I don't understand why people are into Berserk. It's so much. And then my friend was like, you should really get into Berserk right now, because he was reading it in 2020, which was a very terrible year for all of us. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this is like one of my best friends. I was like, okay, if you're recommending it. And he had the same mindset I did of like, I don't want heavy stuff. But suddenly he was like, I want heavy. And I'm like, oh, all right, I'll try Berserk. And I was like, wow, okay, I get it now. I understand. So I was like, be honest with those titles too, where you were like, I wasn't the biggest fan. And then suddenly something happened in my life where I was like, this is exactly what I need right now. And that's kind of what manga does, in my opinion, is sometimes you're not expecting it. Sometimes it's exactly what you need. Sometimes it takes you off guard. Like going into Chainsaw Man took me off guard. And sometimes I'm purposely looking for things. Sometimes it like, I'm not looking for a thing and then it catches me. And I'm like, I'm trying to capture that kind of vibe with this versus like I always get intimidated when something says essential. It's like, it's essential. And it's like, I mean, essential in the sense of like manga is essential in general in like pop culture and just like my everyday life because I get so much out of it. But it's not like a definitive list because the list is ever changing. Like my favorite anime fluctuates so much depending on mood and like time of day, time of year, whatever. It's like I've gone from like wanting the heavy stuff to being like, man, I really could use a way of the house husband right now, where it's just a guy trying to keep his house together. That's all I want. I don't want anything else. Like that's all I need right now. Or I could really use like, and until I meet my husband by like a gay activist who gives me hope, and like the queer community and the way we're being treated. It's like I could use that right now. And manga always kind of has my back with that. So that helped. But every time someone asks me how I figured out the 50, I'm like, I don't know. I made a list and then the list was longer than 50. And then I was like, pick one by each creator. Don't pick more than one. And like, do the series you love. And then I looked at my wife and I was like, please help. Like, how do I pull this down?
I was going to say, it's like you blacked out and woke up and there was a list.
And then while I was writing the essays, I would discover another book and I'm like, ooh, I should swap this out. And my editor was like, no, it's okay. You don't have to have every manga in here. Like, but there's so many good ones. I don't know.
Yeah. I found myself as I was reading each essay that you did contribute that if anything, and you're going to probably yell at me for this, if anything, I almost wanted longer essays and less series.
I read your review too, and I saw that comment. I was like, that is like the most complimentary critique a writer could get, I think, when someone's like, I want it to be longer. And it's like, some of them were longer.
I mean, it's a testament to your editor and your structure, because they do all seem to be about the same length, which the other editors will gladly pop in here for our site and be like, yeah, he doesn't know to shut up. So like, I understand that struggle.
And like, there's so much I would want to say. And then my editor was like, don't spoil a lot of things. And I'm like, but what if I want to talk about the spoilers? Like, I'm a huge My Hero fan. And I'm like,
oh, geez.
She's like, no. And I'm like, and some of these I've written essays for before. So I was like, oh, I need to try and do it at like a new, like I've written about Utena before because it's Utena. And I was like, okay, do a new perspective. But sometimes I would turn in an essay and they're like, Brie. And I'm like, I'm sorry. So sorry. You're like, we need to like shave this down a bit. And I was like, I feel like I could have done 20 manga and had it be the same length as the 50 if I just wrote everything I actually wanted to say about some of it.
Oh yeah. Some of these genuinely feel like the introductory chapters to an entire book, just talking about the series, which is well, I think it's great because we don't there's a lot of writing online. Obviously, you do it, I do it. There's plenty of like underground sites that have really stellar writing and analysis, and there's even YouTube video essays that some of those are really, really good. But I feel like it's all centralized online, and it all kind of still follows that whisper network of anime fandom that goes back to what we were talking about before. Like when in the 80s and 90s, you didn't know what it was even called. We were all kind of making it up as we went. I feel like a lot of that kind of higher level critique of anime still lingers in those spaces. And it's not really upfront. It's not really in a really graspable format. To have this printed in the same way that you would have somebody write about a movie and publish that book, or write about a filmmaker and publish that book, I think is a really good milestone. I don't know if this is like the first one, but like this is really, really good to get front and center and actually start having those conversations, because I talk about it in the review, so I don't feel bad spoiling this one, but like your Dragon Ball essay does not recommend Dragon Ball, for lack of a better term. It starts by, explaining Dragon Ball, and then I don't know if this was your experience or not, but it really feels like you just kind of at one point said, you know what? Everybody knows what Dragon Ball is. We don't need to do this. but we have to talk about Dragon Ball. So I'm going to talk about where I am with in regards to Dragon Ball now. And you come away with this critique of Goku that's not necessarily like brand new. People have criticized Goku being kind of a bad dad forever. Piccolo is the real father of Gohan. We all know this. But by framing Goku like becoming this person who grows and changes but still has faults and like has never rested, and so the series has gone on for way longer than anybody intended. You know, it's a different look at that, but it demonstrates to somebody who for some reason doesn't know what Dragon Ball is. They don't know who that guy at the Thanksgiving Day parade with the spiky hair is.
Right.
That's getting more vague to say too these days, but you know, they can at least appreciate that there's more to it than just Goku in them, right? So it's those kind of essays. You did that for Naruto as well, where it's like Naruto was very formative, but it's not now.
And like I feel like that was one of the most fun things, was looking at series that I was into when I was younger. Like Dragon Ball was not my first anime, but it was the first like anime and manga that really like hit me and hit like a lot of people around me. And Goku was like my hero. Like Goku was the guy I would draw in like crayon, you know, like and draw the hair and everything. And and then like the show is still going, and it's one of those reflective things where like it's like when people look back at like Evangelion and they realize that like, you know, maybe I shouldn't be yelling at a teenager for not getting into robot because he's going through a bunch of like trauma. and I did that with Sailor Moon. I was like, maybe I shouldn't yell at a 14-year-old girl for not wanting to save the world because she's 14, you know? And so like I did that with Gohan. I was like, God, he was 4 years old when this all started, and he's already got to fight his uncle as like his first opponent. Jesus Christ. And so writing that essay was like looking back at like what I loved about Dragon Ball and looking at it now and be like, I still love it, but my God, Goku is still like fighting this battle. And I'm like, I'm at a point in my life where I'm like, I don't want to fight all the time. Like, I kind of want my characters to be able to like settle down, and Goku's not that guy. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. He's not that guy at all. He's never going to settle down. And then like looking at other characters, like Vegeta would scare me when I was like younger. Like, God, this guy's scary. He's going to destroy the earth. And now being like, man, he's like a really good family man. Like, he loves his family. And he's like, yeah, I got to stay around with Bulma. She's pregnant. Like, I got to be here for her. And I'm like, wow, like the character flip on that one. And Piccolo being like the most villainous dude, and toward the end of Dragon Ball suddenly being like, I'm gonna watch Gohan and Goten, and it's like, yeah, and watching them progress, and then realizing Goku, the main character, is still like, I'm gonna go fight. And it's like, that's fine. You're not the character for me anymore, but I am not gonna deny the fact that like when I was 10, 12, 13, 18, you know, I was like, oh, that's my guy. Like, that's the guy. Like, he keeps going, and I needed that. And like Naruto was the same way, because Naruto was like, I'm in college by myself and I don't know anybody. I went out of state. I was 6 hours away from home. And I was like, here's this kid who is looked down on by everybody for something that he could not control. Like, he didn't do that to himself. And he's like, I'm still going to live my dream. And like, God, I needed that at 18. I really needed that. And now it's like, I don't need that as much anymore because I'm an adult now and I've lived a life and I have my comfort and my space. So now my brain is like, well, I want to keep my comfort and space safe. So when I see things like Way of the House Husband, which is a retired Yakuza, who's like, I don't want to do that anymore. I really just want to like get the Roomba to work and get my wife like birthday presents that she likes. And that's literally it. And every time someone tries to pull him back in, he's like, no, I'm not going to. I want to make dinner. And I'm like, God, that's me. Like, I don't want to be pulled in anymore. I just want to make dinner. And that's why going back to like those older series and be like, wow, I'm not in that headspace anymore. But I think a lot of us do that. And it's like, we're not in that headspace, but we still are like, but I understand, man, back in 1990, whatever year, that's what I needed. But now in 2024, it's like, I don't really need that anymore. But I understand why people are still gravitating toward it, because I still get hype when I see anything Dragon Ball, because my 9-year-old girl self is like, oh my God, it's like Dragon Ball. And it's like, yeah, it's still there. So that was really fun to do with those like early 90s, 2000s ones where it's like I've grown up and manga is this thing where like a lot of series that I watched as a kid like don't exist anymore. But like anime and manga, no, that series is still here. One Piece is still going. Dragon Ball is getting new content. Sailor Moon's getting another movie. And it's like Bleach finally had its latest season, you know, and it's like it's still here. These characters are still here, and you're an adult now. And now I get to watch like, you know, my nephews are like, yeah, Auntie Dragon Ball. Like they still watch it with their kids and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, wow, that's wild to think that this is still here. I think this is the same effect that like X-Men 97 had on all of us. Where we're like, oh, it's back.
Yeah. Oh,
it's here. This thing I loved as like, you know, a 9-year-old in like her pink bedroom with a Super Nintendo is back now. And now I kind of like understand the messages more because I'm an adult.
Oh yeah, they really. This is completely out of the range of this podcast, but boy, howdy did they amp it up on that show! Wow, I was enthralled by it.
It was, and that's what a lot of these like anime and manga do for me. Where I'm like, wow, I understand things way more now because I'm 40 and not, you know, 16 or 9, and just writing that like perspective is really cool to me.
Yeah, and I'm glad we are starting to see that perspective in these spaces because I think it's going to help keep the love for these series alive.
And I think a lot of series are doing it in their stories now too. Like a lot of series that I watch go in directions where I'm like, I don't think that would have happened if this were airing 20 years ago.
Oh no!
Like,
oh no!
Like, oh, it's completely like I don't think we would have gotten an episode of My Hero Academia that's just about the class telling Deku to go home and take a bath and go to bed. It's like, oh wow, that's a whole like arc.
That's a mood. That's a whole mood.
And I'm like, yeah, but they're right. You do need to stop and like take a nap. Like literally, that is our fight right now. It's us telling you to stop. Like take a break, take a breath. And it's like there's so many things coming out now that I feel like are like championing, like, you know, it's okay if you need to take a second. It's fine. Like we can have like a delicious in dungeon and have a guy that's like, I just think eating the monster food is cool. And so I'm
like eating well, like Delicious in Dungeon's a great example because it opens with, oh well, we all this entire thing went wrong because we didn't take care of ourselves. Like that's the message of that series.
Yes, they're like, God, we should have actually took a break before we went into the dungeon. And it's like, we could have series that do that now. That's so cool.
It's wild. It's wild how far we've come. That's kind of the last big question that I wanted to have with you because you're very much in this space. You've seen this whole evolution. You work with Crunchyroll. They're kind of the forefront in a lot of ways for where the medium's going. But we have leaped. We have completely leaped from scanlations and barely getting anything translated, and it's flipped around to now you can pull up an app on your phone and read the entirety of One Piece for like $3. So like, where do we go from here? Where does manga, where does anime, does it continue to blow up? Are we going to see a contrast? I know there's some cultural things where people who used to read Western comics now want to read manga because they think it's not woke, and that's really silly of them. But
yeah, it is.
It's so silly. But like, where do we go? Where's the medium go from here?
Oh, I think what I want is for it to grow more. I want people to like respect, like give it the respect that I think it deserves. Like there's still plenty of like people out there who like don't see why we're super into manga. Like every now and then I'll see a post that's like, I can't believe people really like this. And they're pitting it against Western media. Like, I can't believe manga's taking up this much space in the bookstore. And it's like, it's all pop culture medium that's making us feel things. And so I want it to be seen as like a valuable resource, a valuable thing that we all love and enjoy. I think it will grow more. I don't know how, like, I really don't know, like, and it's really hard for me because like, as a kid, what I wanted was like to have more people understand like what I like, and not feel like the only one who's into a thing. And then you kind of find out that like you were never alone in it. There were plenty of people. We just didn't know. And
Yeah.
now it's like, oh, they're like kind of, we're all over the place now. We have like conventions once, like every weekend, and there's all these things. And then like I'll get into a different space. Like in my world, manga and anime is huge. And as soon as I step out, even in other pop culture spaces, people are like, I don't know what anime is. I don't know what manga is. I don't know what the big deal is. And I'm just like, really? You don't? Like, and they're like, no, I don't get it. Like, why are people so into it? And it's like, oh, well, it's because it's amazing. And here's why. But I think I want us to reach a point where it's not seen as like this, like, quote unquote, weird other form of media. And it's just like part of media, period. Like, it's not seen as like this outside thing that just came out of nowhere. And it's like, no, it's here and it's been here. And it's just part of the same entertainment space. Like, it's part, like, I can watch like X-Men 97 and then get done with that and then turn around and watch like Kaiju number 8. Like, it's all the same in my head because it's all entertainment that I love. So I think that's what I would like to see. I don't, and like, it's hard for me to see how much bigger it will get because I never thought it would get this big. Like, I never thought we'd reach a point where I didn't have to, I only got my manga from like a small part of a Walden Books shelf that was only like one row and that was it. Or like Suncoast was the only place to get your anime. There was nowhere else, period. Now I walk into the Target electronics section and they have a manga section and I'm like, what? When did that happen? When did that happen? Like, or like going to look at the clothes and it's like, it's not just Pikachu anymore. Like, it's all the Pokemon, and also there's Luffy and there's Goku and there's Deku. And I think I would like more love for stuff outside of shonen. That's what I would love. Like, I love shonen, don't get me wrong, but like, I would love to be able to walk in the store and also see just as much, you know, shoujo and all the other forms of manga that I love. Like, shoujo is huge, but you wouldn't know it because we usually only see shonen a lot. And, or just like the kind of like heartbreak I feel when I watch a really good shoujo like Sign of Affection and it only gets one season, knowing that the manga is way longer and they can have way more content. And I'm like, I want to reach a day where like shoujo is up to that level, you know, where like I'm always seeing, like, when I go to an anime convention or any space and I see like the cool shonen figures, I'm like, I want a really cool like shoujo figure. Like, I want a cool Fruits Basket, Sailor Moon, A Sign of Affection, you know, all of these. I want those to also have the same love. I want, like, you know, all the queer stories I like to also have the same amount of like stuff I can find. And it's way easier than ever to get like queer manga. It's so cool because back in the day it was like very difficult. But I would love it to have as much anime. Like, for every year where we get maybe like 4 or 5 like queer anime, there's like 30 manga per month coming out in the US. And I'm like, I want these to also get animated. So I want people to like step outside of the shonen bubble, but I also want people to realize that shonen is more than the fighting like series, because like stuff like Komi Can't Communicate is also shonen. So like these like stories that deal with girl with huge anxiety, it's like that is also a shonen story. So I think I just want more of like, I don't want to say understanding because there is a decent understanding, but just like more love for like other types of anime and manga. Like, as much as I love seeing like Demon Slayer in the movie theater, I would love to see like, you know, what was it, like the Given movie came out, Sasuke and Mia had a movie. I would love to go to the theater and see like Sasuke and Mia know the movie. Like, I would love to do that, or like see the Given movie and things like that. And it's getting there because, you know, we had Haikyuu, Blue Lock's coming.
Yeah.
They announced that like Bocchi the Rock's getting recap movies. I'm like, God, I want to see Bocchi the Rock in a movie theater so bad. That'd be so cool. So I want to see more options. And I think we're slowly getting there because I remember back in the day, we would get like a Dragon Ball Z movie at a theater that was like 500 miles away from my house. Like, it was not readily available in an AMC. Now, like, because we saw the Spy Family movie, and I'm like, God, that's probably going to be like, you know, 5 towns over. And I looked at my like like the movie theater app, and it was like 5 minutes right there at that theater. It's like, what? It's like, yeah, it's more readily. It opened everywhere. So I'm like, I want more of that for more stuff. And I think that's what I just want more. I feel like it sounds so greedy. It's like, I just want more. I just want more, but more like variety and more like understanding. Like I'll see people talk online about like best X moments in anime, and I'm like, they're all shonen, which shonen is amazing. I love shonen, but you're also forgetting like you can get moments like this in a bunch of other like types of stories. So yeah, I think that's what, and I think we'll get there. It's just, it feels like it takes so long, but I already waited like 30 some years to reach like this point.
Right.
So
it doesn't.
I feel like we're moving faster than we ever have. I feel, which is wild to think about, because I never, like we've talked about before, like I can't stress enough how I never ever thought that like I'd walk into like a Barnes and Noble and they have like an entire dedicated wall, 5 rows of books, an end cap, a toy area. Like, that was not, I was in college and it was like, yeah, there's my fruits basket and my Naruto, and that's about it. That's about all that's at the store. So
manga's basically the load-bearing wall of Barnes and Noble at this point, so it's kind of wild.
It is, but yeah, I think that's what I foresee happening. Like I don't foresee it slowing down anytime soon. Like there's always a moment in like pop culture where I feel like people are like, when's it gonna be like the fatigue or the like exhaustion? And I'm like, I don't think it will ever hit anime and manga because there's so many options. There's so much variety that we are always entertained by it, like all the time. Like there's always something every season without fail. And it's like, yeah, there's something for everyone, truly. So we just keep it going.
Yeah. And diversifying our own tastes is a pretty good takeaway here, since the Essential Manga Guide is available now in ebook form and in bookstores. And wouldn't you know, it has a bunch of different recommendations that aren't just shonen. So you could check that out. Briana, thanks for taking the time to talk with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, this was fun. This was a lot of fun, and also fun going down memory lane. And
right. Well, you're welcome back. We don't only do One Piece, I promise. But that being said, to the listeners, we will be back sooner rather than later with One Piece 1117, I believe. John's would be mad I said it that way, but that's okay. And we will see you again. Briana, you're welcome back anytime. Thank you again, and thanks for listening.
Thank you. Bye.